I'm gonna make a version of chicken fricasse. You're gonna need butter and oil, any type of cooking oil that you generally use, an onion or a shallot, or a combination of both, garlic, mushrooms, thyme, white wine, and chicken stock. I'm going to use whatever part of onion that I have left of this one and do the rest as a shallot. And I've seen recipes where some people use onions and some people use shallots, so the specific one I don't think is important. I'm going to make the slices 1/4 of an inch or smaller. I kind of use my pinky fingernail to measure it because I always have a pinky fingernail with me. I'm going to take the top off each shallot and then slice almost to the root in really thin slices, and then I'll turn it and slice across. Next, I'm going to take all these onions and 2 tablespoons of butter and start caramelizing them in the pan. You caramelize over a low temperature because you're cooking for a long time. I also added some salt on top to help draw the moisture out of the onions. And while the onions are cooking, I'm going to cut up 1.5 cups of mushrooms. Or if you're measuring it, this is 7 ounces of mushrooms. I'm going to cut them in half and then cut thin slices because the mushrooms are going to get even smaller as all the water cooks out of them. Now that the tofu is wrapped up in a towel, and then I have a heavy book sitting on it to help get the moisture out of it, I'm going to take mushrooms, I cut them in half, and then I lay it flat side down, and then I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch, actually less than 1/4 of an inch, slices across the top, and then thin slices the same diameter the rest of the way. So back to my measuring tool, pinky nail, it's about the size of a pinky nail. I'm going to cut up the rest of the mushrooms, and when the onions are caramelized and nice and brown, then we'll add the mushrooms in. And I'm also going to do 4 garlic cloves. Cut them up into tiny pieces. And I'm also going to put in a little bit of yellow squash. I took the skin off because I find them too hard to eat. And then I'm making the pieces really small, and I'm going to add that in as a little bit of extra vegetable to add to this. are nice and brown, I'm going to add a little bit more oil into the pan to help cook the mushrooms. And with the mushrooms, we need to get all of the water out of them first before they'll start cooking. So I'm gonna put a little more salt on top. About half a teaspoon. I'm also going to add in the yellow squash now too, so that we can get water out of those as well. I'm going to turn the heat back up a little bit now that the onions are caramelized. If you look, you can see the water around the edges. That's what's coming out of the mushrooms. And you want to boil all of that off before the mushrooms can start cooking. And while the water's cooking off, I'm going to chop up some thyme. About 6 sprigs of thyme. And if you hold near the top and just run your fingernail down. Oh, okay, should have held the other top. The leaves will come right off. And then I'm gonna just run the knife through it a couple times. Thyme leaves are really tiny. I'm also gonna grab some flour because we're going to make a roux. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of flour. And I'm also going to add in the garlic and the thyme. You want to cook the flour for a little bit. If you think about how you make paste, it's flour and liquid, and you don't want your dinner to taste like paste, so you cook the flour for a minute or so after you put it in, and that cooks off the paste flavor. And then I'm going to add in a cup of white wine. I'm also going to add in a bay leaf and some pepper. And then I'm also going to add in 2 cups of chicken broth. And I'm going to cut up the tofu that's been pressed and add that in, and then let this all cook for a while. I've seen people do it 2 different ways. I've seen people take it and just cut slices, and then cut the slices into slices and make those into cubes. And I've also seen people just kind of take chunks off and put it through their fingers so that you have a bunch of irregular pieces of tofu. Irregular pieces, my brain likes that idea better, so that's what I'm going to do with mine. But if you want to make squares, that's a great idea. I'm just trying really hard. Tofu's not my favorite thing to eat, and so I'm just trying really hard to present it in a way that my mind doesn't realize what it's eating, because it's a good source of protein and it's very soft. And then I'll let the tofu cook with the sauce. Maybe I should have put a little more flour in to make this a little thicker, but we'll see. We're going to have it cook for at least a half hour, covered with a lid. And actually, now that I think about it, bring it up to a boil and then turn the heat down and let it simmer before you let it cook for a while. If tofu isn't something that you like, I was also thinking about doing the sauce and throw some beans in and use that as a way to use the sauce and get some protein. You can see the bubbles starting to show up along the outer edges. So turn the heat back down. And it's going to simmer and let all the flavors come together for at least a half an hour.